today I'm going to be talking about Wilfred Owen, who was regarded as, or is regarded as, one of Britain's greatest war poets. So because he had so much personal experience, in the war, he died actually, while in the war. So his poems are very, very powerful pieces because they're firsthand accounts of his intense personal experience on the front lines. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about his background and then his poems, Anthem for Doomed Youth and Dulce et Decorum Est. So he was born into a middle-class family in 1893 near Shropshire, and he was the oldest of three. His father was a railway clerk, and his mother was from a very fervently religious family. He enlisted in the army in 1915, and in 1916, in December, he was sent to France, and he joined the 2nd Manchester Regiment there. Within 2 weeks of arriving, he was commanding a platoon on the front line. And so he's commanding this platoon on the front line. I mean, we're talking heavy gunfire. They're having to wade for miles through trenches that were 2 feet deep in water. Constant threat of gas attacks. I'll talk a little bit more about gas in just a little bit. And so this reality, this brutal reality that he was living his existence, had a very profound effect on him. And he wrote about it often in letters home to his mother. He had several poems in addition to the ones that we're going to talk about today, like The Century and Exposure, where he's recording like specific ordeals that he went through. In 1917, he was wounded by a mortar shell. He was sent to Craig Lockhart's War Hospital, which was near Scotland, Edinburgh, where he spent 4 months there under the care of Captain Arthur Brock, who was a doctor. He wrote many poems there, became editor of the hospital magazine, which was titled Hydra. He also met fellow poet Siegfried Sassoon, who would play a very critical role in his life, support, encouragement. They had a literary friendship. Sassoon was an editor, and this relationship with Sassoon would really transform Owen's life. Through him, he met very key literary figures at the time, including Robert Graves, Robert Ross, H.G. Wells, who wrote The Time Machine. Robert Ross and Sassoon were both homosexuals. And so there was a lot of speculation. I mean, and really confirmed that Owen himself was, also, and that maybe his relationship with Sassoon was something, a little more along, but they had a very powerful friendship regardless, and he had a very profound effect on Owen. In 1918, in September, Owen returned to the front during the final stages of the war. He was awarded the Military Cross for bravery, and he was killed at age 25 while he was leading his men across the Sambre and the Oise Canal near Ors. On the 4th of November, which was just 1 week before the armistice was declared. So 1 week before the end of the war. So he died at age 25. And Sassoon would compile all of his poems together and publish them in 1920. So although his works could not really help his own generation, he definitely had an impact on further generations, on like attitudes to war. That was his legacy that he left behind. Okay, so we're going to be talking about Anthem for Doomed Youth first. So he's 2nd Lieutenant, Manchester Regiment. He fell into a shell hole and was blown sky high by a trench mortar. And for several days was in a trench in this hole with a dead guy, a fellow officer. And then afterward, they diagnosed him with neurasthenia, which is commonly known as shell shock. And that's when he was sent to Craig Lockhart Hospital. And so he wrote Anthem for Doomed Youth and many other texts while he was there at and Dulce et Decorum Est as well during his time there. So sonnet form. It serves as a dual rejection of both the brutality of war and of religion. So the first part is going to take place during a heightened battle. And then the second part is kind of like outside the war, maybe kind of the whole idea, and we saw this already before with Hardy, like the people back home, like the people that are waiting at home to hear about the lives of their loved ones and their fates. And then it was also Siegfried Sassoon that gave the poem the title Anthem. All right, so here we go. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns. Only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells and bugles calling for them from sad shires. So stanza 1 opens, as many of Owen's poems do, with righteous anger. What passing bells for those who die as cattle? Where are the bells for them? Where are the prayers for them? The ones that died like cattle. It really sets the tone and the mood for the rest of the poem. It dehumanizes the soldiers' unnecessary slaughter, right? Like cattle. He made no secret that he was, against the war, great critic of the war. And he also criticized pro-war poets, which I'm going to talk a little bit in Dulce et Decorum Est. They wrote about the glories of war, trying to get men to enlist in the battles, and he was, staunchly against that, and he was very critical of them as well. So he believes that war was a horrific waste of human life, which is, fitting because it wasted his life too as well. So the stanza continues in the pattern of a pitched battle, as though it were being written during, in the trenches, right? The anger of the guns, the stuttering rifles, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells. It's horrible, this world that he's in, this world that he's creating here in these first few lines. Chaos, madness, loss of control. And the soldiers, their near reluctance in fighting, right? They're, what is this all for? Why are we here, right? We know we have to do, we've signed on to do this, but we're being slaughtered like cattle here. A great deal of, at this point in the war, a great deal of the army had lost faith, that it was a noble cause and that they were fighting for something. And they were really only fighting out of fear that they would be court-martialed and sent to prison for deserting the war. So he talks about orisons can patter out. Only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. The only prayers that they're hearing is these stuttering rifles. Orison is a type of prayer. Which this is further kind of pointing out his lack of faith, right? So he doesn't believe in faith in God and prayers. The only prayers that he hears, the only bells that he hears are the sounds of the battle. Ironically, the use of the gun, the onomatopoeia there for the guns and the shells, it humanizes war for us. It seems like a living being, much more so than the soldiers who are cattle, right? They are the monstrous anger, the stuttering, the shrill, demented choirs, right? This is like a great monster chewing up everything in its path, including the soldiers that are here that are pouring out their lifeblood in these shell holes, just as he did. And then we have that change. We have the second stanza. So we have a kind of more a quiet, more softened imagery here in the second one. What candles may be held to speed them all, not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds. So he moves away from the war. He's speaking about the people who are affected by it, right? The civilians that are mourning their lost brothers, their fathers, their grandfathers, their uncles, their husbands, their fiancés, the ones who wait for the soldiers to come home and wind up in sorrow and pain when they don't return. So this, acute loss of life that he has witnessed is made kind of like in the trenches, is made even more heartbreaking in the second stanza, because it, the people that now have to, that are left behind to mourn this, and what is it all for? It's futile, right? So it's also dusk, if you'll notice too. The candles, the dusk, the slow dusk, a drawing down of blinds, to signify the end, not only of the soldiers, but also the mourning. They begin the day, they end the day, their mourning will continue on. The pattern of mourning will continue on. They're just putting it to rest for nights to experience it fresh in the morning. And that kind of like brings everything to a close, the drawing down of blinds to this new way of life until the next day. So very powerful piece. I'm going to actually stop this screencast and pick up with Dulce et Decorum Est, because I want to kind of I don't want to rush through. I want to give it the time that it needs to be able to kind of fully talk about it. So I will close this one down. We'll open up again with part 2 of Wilfred Owen, where we talk about Dulce et Decorum Est.